Or they just flying.
Hopefully she'll contact us soon.
Cousins. I know my dad's family.
Oh, I know.
But anyway, they just, like, yeah, relatives born in the same area, that sort of thing. Okay.
I know.
Good to see you.
Laura and Andy live. I gotta go here. I gotta get out of here. It's so south of the Bay Area. It's just asphalt. Isn't that true?
Afraid to sit in front. Oh, I was kidding. I said I'm afraid to sit in the front row.
I used to be. Now I can't hear unless I sit in the front row. So.
That always helps.
It does.
It'd be a good idea for me to turn this off. Oh, it always rings in the middle of the speech. I'm sure it's secretly programmed that way.
Did my mommy say it was okay? Yeah.
Friday, I met them. They would wear.
Oh, that's a long day.
I left at 7 and I got home at 7.
Oh, 12 hours.
That's what I do as a possibility.
Oh, sure.
So that's why I just let them know.
Most everybody's over 24.
I noticed that. What's that all about?
I'm not sure.
Oh, my niece called. She says, oh, I've got a mom walker. I said, what's a mom walker? She says, you know, a dog walker? I need somebody to walk my mom.
Yeah.
I'm going, okay, you hired somebody to walk your mom. She says, otherwise, she says, she just sits in her chair. And she's my age. She's 72, so it's not like she's 70.
The star of the show just arrived.
The star of the show's been here.
I was hoping he was coming. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Assembly Member Kiley
I hope you're still coughing by the end.
We're both very excited to be here tonight and very excited to see such a large crowd. I see some important people here tonight. I saw a council member, Mike Kozlowski, come in the back over here. And we have Folsom Fire Chief Rodriguez. Stand up, take a bow. And we have Folsom Recreation and Parks, YK, Shalom Chandra. Did I say it right? I know YK as YK. He's an old friend of mine, by the way. Who did I forget? I know there were other council members that were maybe going to come, but I'm not sure if they're here yet. Councilwoman Aquino, Howell, anyone else here? Okay. Well, I wanted to make sure that I acknowledged all of the people who serve on the boards and commissions in the community, because those jobs are sometimes thankless and they do take a lot of time, and it is a commitment, and so those community leaders make a difference in our world. And so this isn't really my show. I don't know why I'm talking. It's your show. Should we have the pledge, or what would you?
Pledge of allegiance?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we have a flag?
Yes.
There we go. It's a key part of the pledge. Go ahead.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, let me just say it's really an honor to be able to join Supervisor Frost, who's one of the truly just outstanding leaders in the Sacramento region, most dedicated, most hardworking, and most effective. And I agreed with her that she'd take all the hard-hitting questions. Yeah. And you can lob me all the softballs, so just so you know in advance, that's the arrangement. So for those who don't know me, I'm Kevin Kiley. I've had the great honor to be your assembly member for a little over 2 years now. I'd like to say that we've solved all of California's problems these last couple years. Unfortunately, that's not the case. In fact, a lot of our challenges have grown larger. But I do believe that we have managed to find a good recipe for success, even in a less than favorable political environment, be able to advance some good policies for our area and for the state. We've gotten legislation passed and signed dealing with things like public safety and educational opportunity and economic opportunity and freedom of speech on college campuses. I've also, very important issue, I've also tried where possible to stop bad legislation from passing, and there's quite a bit of that in my opinion, such as leading the charge against the sanctuary state bill, which is now being challenged in court. And finally, I've tried to revive the lost art of legislative oversight. You know, a lot of folks get to Sacramento and they say, oh, I'm a lawmaker now. I guess it's just my job to make laws. And so they hash out law after law after law. In fact, when I was first elected, they even raised the limit for how many laws you get, bills you get to introduce as a legislator from 40 to 50 because we didn't have enough laws. So last year, there were something like 3,000 bills introduced. And something like 1,200 passed, 1,000 were signed into law. So you have 1,000 new laws on the books. Just last year. Over the last 60 years, I think there's been 50,000 new laws created in the state of California. And by the way, how often do you hear about one getting repealed? And then what happens once those laws get passed? Well, a lot of times they end up in the hands of the agencies that hash out different regulations based upon them, and that's where I feel like a lot of the waste occurs in our state government. So what the legislature is supposed to do is keep a watchful eye on how the agencies are managing our tax dollars, but that has basically been neglected in recent years. So I'm trying to bring that back, and one example of that is with the Department of Motor Vehicles, which, to put it mildly, has got a lot of issues. And so I've been trying to get a full audit of the DMV, which we came one vote short of getting last year, but we're bringing that back. So those are a few of the things I've been working on, but tonight's really about taking questions from you. So with that, let's get started. Unless do you have other opening remarks, Sue?
I'll just make a couple. I wanted to bring to you this evening to give you a little bit of an idea about what is going on in the county and how what's going on at the state is creating challenges at the county level. And to kind of visit a little bit about your top concerns. Are you all, are most of you folks that have been to my community meeting before? Anyone that's been to my community meeting before? Okay, so a lot of you. So I'm just briefly going to talk a little bit about, you know, some of the things that are the biggest concerns to constituents. One of the things that I do as a supervisor is I work really hard to find out what are you thinking and what are your top concerns. And what was interesting to me in the second year of my service on the Board of Supervisors is those little surveys that I sent out began to show trends and changes. One of the things that changed was when I first came on board, the big top concern was public safety and roads and homelessness. And this year, when I put my survey out there, the big top concern was homelessness, and then roads and public safety were kind of a toss-up. So there are things happening, a lot of things happening at the county that are impacting our budget. And homelessness is one of them. Homelessness is one of the big issues that we're working on, and for those of you who have heard me talk or read my articles, you'll know that the county has a very comprehensive approach to homelessness. We have initiatives that, and our philosophy is basically you can't put someone in a building and cure the problem. There's lots of different causes to homelessness. Homelessness is a symptom, it's not the disease. So treating it isn't really the answer. Treating the cause is the answer. And so what we do is we try to find ways to remove barriers to people coming back out. We're trying to work on housing and mental health services and drug abuse and all those things. So one of the top initiatives that I introduced this year at the county that I'm really excited about and that the board was in full favor of was our homeless work program. And that emanated from a tour that I took at Pride Industries, and I was so inspired when I went there. I mean, that company is an inspiration. And the challenge we have with homeless people, some of them are connected to Social Security or they have disability income, but some of them are young people who don't have a job and don't have a skill. And so the homeless work program, what it's going to do in simple terms is it's going to give them work experience. There's going to be, it's a pilot. It was just approved for $387,000 for this year. It's going to be 4 groups of 10 people, and the staffing ratio is 1 to 5. So there will be 10 people for 10 weeks. And Pride Industries will be managing the oversight on this and making sure those people get to the job and to the school. What they'll basically be doing is picking them up, taking them to work for a few hours, then for the second half of the day, they'll go study and take a certification course and learn a trade in the construction industries, which is an area that we're short on we're short of workers in that area. Once they earn their certificate, Pride Industries will help them find a paid internship, and hopefully if they do well, a job will result from that, and we'll be able to connect them with a sustainable housing situation and help them process out of homelessness. But in the meantime, we'll help them get rid of their, take care of their warrants. We'll help them get cleaned up and get clothes and get their resume situated, and we'll get them in a position where they are prepared to know how to interview for a job. So I'm really excited about the homeless work program. Also, I promise I won't be too long. Also, I wanted to touch base on the roads. How many of you are from Folsom? Most of you are from Folsom, so you're probably not as concerned about roads because Folsom has pretty nice roads. But when I got elected for supervisor, the unfunded backlog of maintenance on roads in Sacramento County was $450 million. We had a Sacramento County pavement condition report the other day at the Board of Supervisors, and the unfunded backlog is now $783.8 million. The reason, I mean, that's just 2 years. In 2 years, it's almost doubled. And what happens with roads when you don't fix them, the worse the pavement condition gets, the more you have to tear them down to rebuild them and fix them. And it gets to be exponentially more expensive to fix the roads if you defer the maintenance on them. And that's what we've done over time. And without going into huge detail, what I did want to tell you, the good news is that the county is cognizant. There is not enough funding for the roads. Even with the new largest tax in the history of California, the SB1 tax, we are at about $35 million a year, and we need $50 million or more just to maintain the roads where they're at today. The average pavement condition in Sacramento County, pavement condition goes from 0 to 100. If it's 70 to 100, it's in pretty good condition. If it's 25 to 49, it's poor, and if it's up to 24, it's very poor. Sacramento County is at 50. And so the worse the pavement condition gets, the exponentially more it's going to cost who to fix? You. You're the ones paying for it. It's public money. And so what I wanted to let you know is there are conversations going on. Councilmember Kozlowski serves on the SACOG board with me as a fellow board member, and we have been having conversations about how are we going to fund the roads, because the federal and state government, not Kevin, not Assemblyman Kiley, but the federal and state government have somehow over the years reduced the amount of funding that's going to maintaining the roads. And so now we're having those conversations around another local, maybe possible, a local tax measure, and what would the taxpayers be willing to pay, toll roads, dedicated lanes. There's all kinds of ideas that are emerging. We even have had new conversations emerging as the passenger rail. You've heard about the high-speed rail. Well, Governor Newsom has stated that they're going to just be building it up to from Merced, Bakersfield to Merced. So that 3-hour trip from LA to San Francisco is going to consist of passenger rail up to Bakersfield, and then the fast rail to Merced, and then passenger rail to Sacramento, Marysville, and on over to San Francisco. Now, what I want to leave you with, because there is always a cost, and that's the question that we always try to think about. What is the unintended expense associated with all this? Rail, my understanding of rail, I'm still studying on the issue, but my understanding around the rail is that it's pretty much around a 50% subsidy. So before you even start, it's a negative balance on your balance sheet. Buses are around 80% or more subsidy. So public transportation is an expense. It's worthwhile. From what I understand, regional transit transports 100,000 people a day during peak hours during the week. And so that's a lot of people who use public transportation, even though it seems like they don't seem that full, you know. But what the point I wanted to get across was we have a local priority to fix our roads, but we can't seem to get that money prioritized. The money that was prioritized for that has been transferred over to pay debt on transportation and to pay for high-speed rail and other things that don't have enough money. So I wanted you to have that, be cognizant of this challenge that we're up against. And also wanted to let you know, and I don't know much about it, but there is, from what I hear, a whisper of a new bill coming, SB 246. Maybe the Assemblyman will touch on it, but it's around imposing oil and natural gas severance tax on businesses, which when you tax big business, they have to make money, and so they pass that cost on to the consumer. That's pretty much the way it goes. The last thing I wanted to share, I'm trying to be quick. Am I okay? All good? Okay. Organic waste is the next thing coming to Sacramento County. In 2016, Governor Brown signed into law a bill that was going to mandate local jurisdictions to reduce food waste by 75% by 2025. It's called SB 1383. And what is green waste? It's wood, food, sewage, sludge, paper, cardboard, manure, carpets, living organisms. So basically, we're going to have to figure out how we are going to process that food waste, and that is beginning that is a conversation that's beginning at the county. The challenge we have is that we're going to have probably we're going to have to figure out how we're going to digest, have composting facilities that will digest this stuff without violating the air quality regulation and air quality regulations. And this will have it will be not only an impact on how we manage our landfills, but it will be a huge educational endeavor to teach people to put food waste maybe in a little bucket that they walk out and put into their yard waste and rinse the bucket out and put it back on their countertop. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work, but just to kind of give you an idea, this is not like what we've been through, anything we've been through yet. And the reason I say that is because this is a punitive, it applies a requirement that we regulate it and that we establish a system of fines and that we become basically the food police. And so we're trying to figure out how we're going to deal with that. And that's something that's going on at the county. And then lastly, I wanted to let you know, our police do so much. They not only work to keep us safe in our neighborhoods, but they work with family outreach, they do turkey drives, they help to the campfire victims, they adopt families at the holidays, they have a hot team that is out there with a phone app, developing relationships with homeless people and helping us track who's where, and so that we can better serve communities. They have a crisis intervention team that teams social workers up with police, and so they can go to domestic violence calls. But over time, there's been kind of what I call kind of an assault on our public safety personnel, and that assault has been all due to there's several reasons for it. The requirements on how we manage our prisons cause the states to want to release the prison population early. We changed the way we look at crime. We redefined it, and we changed the tools that police can use. And in what used to be crimes is no longer a crime. You can walk in and just steal up to $950 in the Rite Aid and walk away. I've seen it. I watched it. And so the next thing coming is, I heard whispers about it. It's around de-escalation. It's policy that's going to try to get officers to take a moment and think while they're reacting in split-second situations that they trained all their life to react in the right way to. I guess they want those officers to then stop and analyze and critically think about what they should do before they take a shot or defend themselves. And so I haven't read the entire policy. I just know that de-escalation is part of the conversation, and bail reform is part of the conversation. And bail reform traditionally has been a private business. My concern about bail reform is that it could potentially shift what used to be a private business to a public, something that the public has to administer, which means anything the public does is going to cost a lot more. So it's another cost, and we can't even afford all the other stuff we're doing now. So those are some of the big concerns. I told someone that was what I'm promising. I'm going to tell them what my concerns are, and then I'm going to sit back and let everyone ask the assemblyman all the answers.
I see how it works.
So, I'm sorry. No. But the county is there is a lot of good news going on at the county, but we do have challenges with our budget. We do have to make every dollar count because we're getting pinched tighter and tighter. So, that's where we're at.
All right. Any questions?
What is that good news?
Back here, yes. Oh, we gotta. Oh.
What's going on with the efforts to split the state so we can stop all this?
Well, as far as I'm aware, we're still one state. But there have been various proposals over the years. I think there's actually been like several hundred, maybe, proposals over the years. Most recently, we had this guy from, Silicon Valley, Draper, is that his name? Who came up with the 6 Californias, and then he decided that was, I guess, twice as many Californias as we need, so he came back with 3 Californias. And he actually had this to the point where it was qualified for the ballot, where we were actually poised to vote on this, if you can believe that, last November, but then a judge threw it out. So it didn't end up making it. Those proposals, as far as I am concerned, are kind of pie in the sky, especially since the way Mr. Draper drew up the latest map would have put California in the same state, us in the same state as San Francisco, which probably wouldn't have been a whole heck of a lot better, as far as I'm concerned. Now, the more serious and really community-based movement is what's called the State of Jefferson movement. Are folks here familiar with that? And that is based upon a very, profound premise, profoundly true premise, and that's that California has a terrible system of representation, where we have these just enormous state legislative districts. A state senator represents 1 million people. A assembly member represents 500,000 people. That's about 4 times as many as the next closest state in the United States. We had 40 assembly members or 40 senators and 80 assembly members when California became a state. We still have 40 senators and 80 assembly members, now that the population has grown just a little bit to about 40 million. You add to that the fact that the way that our houses go about providing representation had to change several decades ago as a result of a U.S. Supreme Court decision. Now, if you look at the federal government, we have a bicameral Congress there as well, right? We have the House of Representatives, where it's roughly based on population, and then the U.S. Senate, where every state gets 2 senators. The states used to do it similarly, where you had basically every county had a senator, and then the assembly was population-based. But the U.S. Supreme Court came in and said, no, you're not allowed to do that. Both houses have to be population-based. And so what that did is it resulted in a vast redistribution of political power from regions like the North State up here to, the major urban centers of California, namely Los Angeles and San Francisco. And I think that what has ensued in this state and the direction that we have been going can be largely traced back to that redistribution of political power. So the Jefferson movement has been really good about highlighting this underlying issue for the dysfunction of California state government in a lot of ways, of the lack of meaningful representation. Remains to be seen, but they've a lot of folks are involved. Yes, sir.
I have a 2-part question, I assume.
This is our representative on the county's SHRA board. I'm sorry I didn't see you before, Mel.
Well, I just came in a little bit late. Thank you. Assemblyman, I heard you on the radio today, and the text tax, you might want to talk about that a little bit. But also, I'm a former member of a water board, and I was talking to the current manager of the Rio Linda Water District Board, and we were talking about the thing that Jerry Brown started and Governor Newsom is continuing, and that is 55 gallons a person and taxing tap water. And what's the governor and the Democrats looking at? An exodus of California of all Republicans, or what?
My gosh, where do I even start with that? The overarching theme you've identified is the insatiable appetite for taxation that you see from the state government. Under Jerry Brown, the state budget grew by over 50%. Like $65 billion. That's how much higher the state budget is now than it was when Jerry Brown took office. And I don't mean when he took office back in the 1970s. It's grown just that much since 2010. And despite all of that, and despite a $21 billion projected surplus, by the way, you have all of these new tax proposals that keep coming out. And so last December, this one actually came from the state bureaucracy. They decided that'd be a good idea to start taxing your text messages. Now, does anyone text here? Any texters in the room? You're not alone. I think that Americans send 1.7 trillion texts every year. And they decided that we needed a text tax, if you try saying that 5 times fast. And they also decided that we should apply it retroactively, going back to tax your texts from the last 5 years. Now, this idea was floated, and then it was pulled back, but now the advocates came forward and said, no, we do want to have the text tax. So I've introduced a bill that will prohibit any taxation of your text messages in California. And by the way, we have every Republican senator as a co-author now and most of the Republican Assembly members, and we're reaching across the aisle to try to get bipartisan support for this. Now, you also brought up water. So the water tax that's being proposed, we've defeated that twice before, but nothing ever truly dies when it comes to legislation at the state capitol. So Governor Newsom has brought it back, and I'm going to be fighting that again. It's the last thing we need, and it would also just turn our local water agencies into tax collectors, and it wouldn't benefit the folks here who are actually paying the taxes. But in general, the water policy that we've seen coming out of Sacramento has been exactly backwards for a long time now. You know, what we should be moving towards is a model of regional self-sufficiency where every region can make use of the tools that at its disposal to have a sustainable water supply, which is undergirded by adequate water storage so that we increase our supply of water. But what we've done is just the opposite. We've moved towards a command and control rationing regime from Sacramento, where, for example, during the drought, we faced draconian cutbacks, which were then squandered. That sacrifice was squandered when the rain kindly came and we didn't have adequate storage to capture it. And this is all now just epitomized by this really just crazy 55-gallon per day indoor water use limit that has been introduced via legislation, which will go down to 50 gallons a day, by the way, within a few years, with hefty fines if you violate it. This is something that I think a lot of people in California don't even know is coming, but it is just the very, it's the best example yet, really, of just how backwards our water policy is. Yeah, I'm back there.
I'd like to tie into what Sue was talking about with the homeless youngsters out there. We're going to teach them how to go into the construction trades. I know you have a background in education. I think you sit on one of the committees for that. I don't think we'd be in this situation if we had the classes in high school that used to be there. We going anywhere with getting those types of classes required in school?
We are moving in the right direction in the last few years. And they're not required yet, but there has been some momentum building for what used to be called vocational education, for what the new in vogue term is career technical education. But for a long time now, you're absolutely right, this has been missing from our schools. And we had this sort of mantra that took hold that every child has to go to college. Certainly every kid should have the opportunity to go to college, but that might not be the right path for every kid. And so it's just a total win-win if we invest in these sort of programs and have them available in our schools, because they're well suited to some kids and the kind of career path they want to go on, and it fulfills a vital workforce need. So that has become a priority. I've worked on it the last couple years to provide more grants for schools that want to undertake career technical education programs. But I think we still need to do a lot more. And you know, the idea you float is worth looking at. There's been some talk of putting it at least as part of the an indicator on what's known now as the dashboard, which is basically what is used to evaluate and describe the offerings of different schools. So it's one of the things that I'm most focused on is education, and specifically very passionate about career education. Yes, ma'am.
Unions have apprentice programs, and they provide mentors for vocational trades. And the more displacement for people coming out of college that can't get a job, and then we don't have apprenticeships for welders and things that not every robot can do, you know. Not everything about unions is bad as far as reaching across and sharing what's good with everything, I think would make us all better.
Absolutely. Big advocate for those sort of apprenticeships. Yes, sir.
Kevin, has anybody thought about reaching out to President Trump about this money that he would like to have back with regards to the train to nowhere? My question is, if we took the $2.5 billion that he wants back and put it towards the roads, and somebody wrote a letter and said, Mr. Trump, we won't give it back to you, but we'll put it towards roads instead of the train, would it work?
It's a good idea. So here's just a brief recap of this whole saga. You know, many years ago, over a decade now, I think, we passed this high-speed rail idea. The cost quickly ballooned beyond what was initially proposed, to the point at which some estimates say it could now cost up to $100 billion. And, you know, at the same time, as Sue mentioned, you know, we have a $52 billion gas tax that's imposed to try to fix our roads, which are among the worst in the country. So the whole idea of this high-speed, quote-unquote high-speed rail, Elon Musk said it would be the most expensive and slowest high-speed rail train in the world if it were ever built. You know, and the technology is probably going to be outdated by the time it gets done, if it ever does get done. And by current projections, it would be cheaper to fly on Southwest, so why would anyone ever ride the thing? So finally, Gavin Newsom, in his State of the State address a couple weeks ago, I don't know if anyone's ever watched the State of the State, same thing as the State of the Union, just in our assembly. So we have, you know, the senators come in and we have the constitutional officers in the Supreme Court and everyone's there, it gets a little crowded. But Governor Newsom acknowledged the obvious, finally, which Jerry Brown refused to do in his speech and said there's been no accountability, the costs have gone way over what they should be, this is not a viable project. And so I sat up in my seat at that point, like, oh my gosh, this is great. But then he went on to say, well, we don't want to have wasted what we've already invested, so we think we should, you know, just complete the Merced to Bakersfield leg of the project. Now, it's not clear exactly if that is needed there. Or if the folks in those communities are asking for it, which I know the folks who represent them, and they're not. But also a lot of people believe that if that is ever completed, then they'll say, oh, well, now we better complete the whole thing. So this is just a way to delay the scrutiny that the project's gotten. Now, you mentioned the president. So he came in and said, well, actually, there's been some federal funding that was offered, you know, in conjunction with the initial plan. But now that you're proposing something different, I want that money back. And I think there are a lot of interesting possibilities for how this is going to play out, and I like the idea you mentioned. Sue, did you have something on this?
I wanted to also add that what we weren't looking at while we were talking about SB1 over the past year or so, they passed SB1 and the passenger rail got $500 million. And that is bringing the San Joaquin passenger rail up to Sacramento. And I believe that was just additional funding to just kind of finish off that the rail idea that was supposed to connect the main job centers. And I think the big problem that we have is that San Francisco and Los Angeles have these huge cities that have a housing and job imbalance. They can't figure out how to house their workers. It's too expensive to live where they work. And so they're trying to figure out how they can get their workers to work. And so now we're beginning to have this conversation around mega regions. Let's all kumbaya together and we can all help each other. And I thought it was really interesting because one of my colleagues, Mr. Councilmember Kozlowski back there, made such a good question in SACOG the other day when he said, I wonder, you know, rather than building a train to get them so they can live here and work over there, why don't we just bring the jobs here? Did you think of that? And so there you go.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to know why the train went over budget and nobody had any, why that wasn't taken control of. I guess you can just spend as much as you want for the train until somebody decides, oh, I guess we've spent enough and we're going to shut the old project down. Didn't they bid on what it was going to cost? And why don't they hold their feet to the fire?
Well, we've been trying, and I've been one of a number of people who have been insisting on audits and explanations as to what's going on. There's been several different heads of the high-speed rail now, just to, you know, keep trying to bring, you know, a fresh start, but the same problems persist. So I'll answer your question in a couple ways. First, a lot of it is just endemic of California bureaucracy in general. I mean, we talked about the gas tax before. One of the arguments that those of us who are against the gas tax made is that the money that we have that is actually being used for transportation, a lot of it is diverted, as Supervisor Frost mentioned, is used extremely inefficiently. We had studies showing that it costs up to 3 to 4 times as much to build a mile of road in California as it does in a lot of other states. And that's because of a lot of the just rigid rules and lack of flexibility and that you have within the state bureaucracy. Now, high-speed rail, even against that backdrop of utter inefficiency, is an unusual case. And the waste and the delays there are unlike we've seen in probably any public works project that I can remember. Well, I mean, you know, I'll give you, let me just finish one other explanation as far as the high-speed rail goes. A lot of it, too, is that they've had to use eminent domain to seize a lot of properties, which is a very lengthy process that involves a lot of litigation. That's another part of this story, is a lot of people have lost their land with high-speed rail. That's another cause of the delays. But there are reports on this that you can read that go into a lot of the other issues as well. So what's the answer? Well, you know, let's look at Caltrans. That's one example. There was a report from the nonpartisan legislative analyst that said that they have thousands of redundant positions that cost taxpayers over, I think it was $500 million every year. What we need to have is the government work more like a business so that, you know, you have to run efficiently, so that you hire the folks that you need and make sure they're doing a good job, and that you're forced to, you know, take the contracts that are most cost efficient. And, you know, the DMV is, you know, another example of this. We need to treat the DMV as a customer service operation so that, you know, we understand that they're there to serve taxpayers. Instead, you know, they just keep asking for more and more money from us, and the quality of service never improves. And that doesn't even look at what's happened, by the way, with their implementation of the motor voter program. If anyone has been following the news around this. So this is veering a little bit for your question, but if you'll indulge me, I mean, we've been seeking answers with respect to the DMV by trying to actually do an audit so we can get, you know, identify the areas where the inefficiencies are occurring. But at the DMV, we insisted on this audit last year, and it failed by a single vote. And so then the legislature adjourns for the year. And after the legislature adjourns, we keep getting more and more news out of the DMV because, you know, they were doing their primary job so well of regulating motor vehicles that we decided to let them into the voter registration business. So we hear first of all that they are registering people with the wrong political party. And then we hear that they're giving people the wrong vote by mail status. And then we hear that they're registering non-citizens. And if you read the Sacramento Bee a few weeks ago, it says that the state still cannot confirm that non-citizens didn't vote in the last election. So the answer is what I've mentioned before. We need to revive the role of legislative oversight. We have agencies that are just granted money and then there's no accountability for the way that they spend it. We need to be looking very closely at how every tax dollar is being spent, and that's something that I've been trying to fight to do to change that paradigm. Yes, sir.
Yes, couple things. Homeless. Have you thought about the possibility, or a person also that's on getting money? If the person is mentally and physically able to work, sir or ma'am, you're entitled to this much. However, we have a job for you. Picking up the trash off the streets. You're going to go to work if you're physically and mentally able. That's one thing you ought to do. The other thing, as far as how the money, the tax money, should be allocated, it should be up to us. Yes. You and the other legislators should say, here are all the things we need money for. We should prioritize that and say, here's our first priority, bang, 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 bang. And if you know that, okay?
I just want to, I want to touch on the up to us part. We all have control at the voter box and in the communities and in our conversations and how we educate ourselves to watch the talk and the walk. You know, I hope you listen to what we say and then you watch us and see if we did what we said, because if we're not, you shouldn't vote for us again. You should vote someone else in there, and you should look at what the legislature is doing, how they're managing your money, and we should be doing a good job helping you better understand that. And that's something I think we both try to do. It's not always easy because it's complicated. I mean, there's a lot going on in government. Government passes a bill and then they start a commission, and the commission is appointed by other politicians, and they meet off on the side, and they have the power to make the rules and adjudicate, you know, and enforce the rules. And so all of a sudden now we have a whole nother arm of government going on outside the purview of the people, and so it's kind of hard for you to really keep track of what's going on. But those of us that are looking from the inside out, we're very frustrated, and we see the problem, but we don't know how to fix it unless the people who really have the power get behind us and help us do that with their votes.
And I'll just add one thing. I agree with everything Supervisor Frost said. But in the state of California, we do have a safety valve by which the people can rein in a runaway legislature. It's a beautiful thing. It's the initiative process. It's been used with Prop 13 for taxpayers to stand up and say enough is enough. But something has happened with the initiative process. It no longer works the way that it was envisioned. And a big part of that is that the very politicians that it's meant to provide a way to go around have figured out how to thwart voter-initiated propositions. And we have a perfect example of this, what happened last year with the initiative to repeal the gas tax. Now, I bring this up in connection with legislation that I have introduced that changes who it is that gets to write the little titles that appear on your ballot. Because a lot of people went to the polls, they want to repeal the gas tax, they know it's bad policy, they don't want to pay 12 cents more a gallon, they know we pay enough taxes to fix our roads already if we just spent the money the way it's supposed to be. And so they got their ballot, where is the gas tax repeal? Because the words gas and tax were omitted from the title of the initiative by the Attorney General of California. That's the person that gets to write the title of the initiative. There's a long history of California attorneys general abusing this power. Dan Walters recently wrote that it's the same thing as stuffing the ballot box if you misdescribe what an initiative will do. And I agree, you are disenfranchising people. So what happened with this legislation I had, which actually was before this whole thing happened with Prop 6, is it got broad support from organizations of different political stripes, from the major editorial boards of the newspapers in California, Sacramento Bee, LA Times, Orange County Register, from good government groups ranging from Common Cause to the League of Women Voters to the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. So I show up at the hearing of the Assembly Elections Committee with all of these supporters in tow, and there's one person who shows up in opposition. Can anyone guess who it is? It was the Attorney General, or a representative from his office saying, no, please don't strip me of this authority. But the initiative was defeated. My legislation failed on a party line vote. And so it was just a couple months later that the Attorney General then provided us with the best case study yet for why we should not have a partisan person in charge of this with what happened in the gas tax. And I have reintroduced that legislation this year to make it so we put this in the hands of a nonpartisan official, the legislative analyst, and let the voters decide, to your point, so they retain the capacity to actually determine what our priorities should be as a state when the legislature isn't getting the job done.
That a lot of my friends are thinking about leaving California. And I'm middle class, I'm finding that a lot of my friends are talking about leaving California.
And I am middle class, and they're not crazy in one way or crazy in another way, but they're getting sick and tired of what's happening. And they're getting sick and tired of us voting for X and you guys spending, you guys, this is a broad brush, I understand, spending money for Y and stealing it from here and putting it there. And when I hear that other states, I drove to Kansas this spring, and the states got nicer, believe it or not. The closer I got to McPherson, it's not McPherson, McPherson, Kansas, and it was amazing about the culture that was changed in those states. I'm not saying there aren't crazy people there, but if I want to buy a house, if I want to buy a very nice house, I can buy one for $150,000, a very nice house. If I have $500,000, I can buy a mansion. End of speech.
Oh, I'll just say real quickly that I think all politicians should be studying economics.
Absolutely. Oh, by the way, all politicians should know what's in the Constitution as well. So I've just introduced legislation to have mandatory training for all new legislators on the state and federal Constitution.
Oh, that's
But to your point, who here knows someone who's left California in the last year? It's amazing. Sure, go ahead.
I'm a veteran. See some other veterans. But our money problem wouldn't be a problem, if, my opinion, if the legal people here were subsidizing funding them.
They can't hear you.
She's got it over there.
She's got it over there.
Okay. My opinion is we wouldn't have a money problem if people were, illegals weren't funding them, okay? We use our money for our citizens first. I'm a veteran, okay? I've had 12 of my friends, I'm the chairman of Folsom Veterans Hall, hi Ray, and left with less than a year. I'm leaving too. I bought property out of state. I'm sick and tired. I claim single on my taxes. I'm a teacher. I teach aerospace science. And I'm retiring next year to get out of here. 53%, I won't name the Fox channel, said that, like the lady said, we're leaving or contemplating leaving the state. When are they going to get it? I'm not going to sit here and my truck, I had a 2015 truck, $700 to register it for a year. And I'm like, do I get Blistex with my bill? I don't mean to be rude, but I'm like, it's ridiculous. Every time I turn around, you reach into my pocketbooks. I'm paying for this, I'm paying for that, like everybody else is saying. I'm tired of it. And I'm going to go to a place that respects me and my wallet and values that my service to the country and all that. And so I feel it's important that we stand up and say enough is enough.
Can I say something real quick? Can I say something real quick? I want to say that I believe this is a problem that started back in the 40s or 50s when we amended our Constitution. I think it was the 16th Amendment that allowed our money, instead of going up from the local level up to state and up to Fed, it allowed the money to pass up to Fed and state and come back down to us. And I want to tell you that at the county level, when we're managing that $4.2 billion budget, most of the money that we're managing it's not discretionary. We don't have local control like you think we do. We don't manage all $4.2 billion. We have a lot of the money that we get, we chase after it, and if we qualify for it, there's a condition on how we spend it and how we report back. It creates additional administrative oversight and running around like chickens with our head cut off to manage it. And so they basically tell us how they want us to act by putting conditions on the money that comes down to us. And they starve us from things they don't want us to have. And so that moves us in different ways at the local level. And so we're controlled in a big way by the bigger government because we let that go. It was ours to lose, and as a people, as Americans, we let that go.
And I'll just add that thank you for your service, first of all. And I'm sorry about the way our state has treated you, because it's not right. And you know, you raised the point about the cost of buying a house here. You know, I talk to folks who say, oh yeah, I have, you know, my son or daughter went to good schools, they got a good job, they're not going to be able to afford a down payment until they're in their mid-40s. You know, home ownership, this is the essence of the American dream, right? You look at how California ranks nationally along a number of metrics. Ronald Reagan said when he was inaugurated as our governor, California should never take second place. And we do, in fact, lead the nation now in a lot of ways. We lead it in terms of you know, the cost of living, the cost of housing, the cost of energy, debt, poverty, taxes, regulation. We're leading the country in all the wrong ways. And by the way, we're rated as having the lowest overall quality of life of any state in the country. How did that happen? We have so many intrinsic advantages, so many incredible people in California. And yet we have the lowest quality of life. You know, this used to be the state everyone used to dream about coming to. Now it's the state that everyone, based on the number who raised your hand, seems to want to get out of. So, you know, I was born and raised in the communities here. And I feel really, really fortunate. I'm sure a lot of folks here were as well. My dad was a doctor here in Folsom for many years. And I feel truly fortunate about that. And what I see is that I see that those opportunities are vanishing for people all across the state, and it all comes down to the way our state has been run. You know, the cost of living is probably top of the list as far as these problems go. I'm still relatively new to this whole political world. My background is as a teacher, as a business attorney, and as a prosecutor. And I got into this to try to do what I can to turn the state around. And I know that it might seem like, you know, there's no hope. But I do think that, you know, fundamentally, we will have an opportunity to get the pendulum swinging back the other way. That's why I'm in it, and I hope that, you know, I hope you all will join me in whatever ways you can as we work to make the government actually work for the people in this state. Yes, sir.
I'm also a retired vet, 22 years in the Navy. I've got two questions. Both of them have to do with the elections. Last time I went to the polls, no Republican on the ballot. 2 Democrats, but no Republican. That does not make any sense to me, and I'd like to know how we can get that changed back the way it was before. The second part of that question is, once a person is elected as Republican or Democrat, they should not be able to change parties during their term in office. And I'd like your comments on that.
So on the first one, this is, I believe it was Prop 14. It's now been the law of the land here for, let's see, since 2012, I want to say, so 4 election cycles. I think it's been a total failure. What we were told when it first passed is that it would lead to more moderate and statesman-like legislators, and it would lead to greater balance as far as the parties go. Well, what we've seen is the most imbalanced legislature we've ever had, and the most extreme policies we've ever had. That's not according to me, that's according to the Speaker of the Assembly, who's at his end-of-the-year speech said this was the most progressive year in the history of the California legislature. Now, all of that is sort of the ramifications of this system, but really the fundamental point, I think, is what you stated, that people feel disenfranchised, that, you know, they should have the chance to vote for the party that they want, but when you go to the polls and see 2 Republicans or 2 Democrats, folks feel like their voice isn't being heard. The second thing about switching parties, so this actually just happened. I don't know how many folks heard about it, but one of my fellow assembly members on our side switched parties and became a Democrat. So it was a 20 to 60 mix, and now it's 19 to 61. And I haven't heard the idea you proposed actually advanced. I'm not sure how that would work, but I think it struck a lot of people as wrong that you'd run as one thing and people would elect you, thinking they're voting for a Republican, and then all of a sudden you're the other party.
I agree with everything you said.
All right. Yes, sir. Sorry, I know I'm calling people in front. We'll move back.
Okay, now, what is the philosophy of the Republican Party now and versus the Democratic philosophy? Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? In today's world, what's the Republican philosophy versus the Democratic philosophy in the state of California? Because according to the seats, the deck is stacked. The deck is stacked for you. We have 61 Democrats and 19 Republicans in the state assembly, and in the Senate we have 28 Democrats, 10 Republicans, and 2 are vacant, and you're running for one of them. So in this, my comment is the deck is stacked. So how do we get Republicans to get it even back where a fiduciary promise of our tax money going to the right programs?
I'm just going to make a quick comment related. I'm sure the Assemblyman has more to say, but I wanted to say at the local level, I serve Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, declined to state. On all fronts, I know people who are amazing and who have good common sense, and many who are not happy about the way things are right now. And I think there are good people in all the parties. And you know, what we have going on in California right now is not economically, it's not working. It's making our quality of life worse. It's causing our costs to go up. It's creating downstream problems. But and I don't think it's a Republican versus Democrat issue anymore. I think it's a philosophy on. I think there are people who are Democrats who at some point are going to say, this is not working. Something's got to give. And on the Republican side, they're saying the same thing. I think what I'm trying to say is we need more common sense in the policy decision. The policy we're making is creating economic hardship in our state. So the question you were asking was, how do we turn it around? Or
fiduciary, how we spend our money versus Republican, it doesn't matter. People are leaving California, okay, so your tax basis is going away. So now we have to raise taxes to continue doing our business when people are taxed.
I don't know.
Getting shorter.
Maybe you want to. Maybe we better hand it over to the expert here.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that, but and I'll be careful about how I answer this, because this is a forum for all of our constituents, regardless of party, and you know, I don't want to you know, be at all partisan, because I think that at the end of the day, though, I do think that whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, all folks would probably like to see a little more balance in terms of the way the legislature is set up. And I will say that I've only been there a couple years, but I've seen that in my own caucus on the Republican side, what we've been doing has not been very effective. Because we've sort of just kind of said, well, we're the minority, I guess we can't do much. Whereas I think we should actually have an agenda that we present in terms of how we'd go about reforming the state. And that agenda should be one that takes on the core quality of life issues that people all across California are struggling with. Issues that doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, what party you are, but that we're all feeling, and we can actually offer solutions. So the 3 that I'd put at the top of my list, and you know, there are a whole lot of other things I care about, but these 3 I think summarize the core quality of life issues facing the state. Number 1 is the cost of living, which we've talked about, and that embodies a whole lot of things, such as taxes and regulations and government waste. And yes, as the gentleman over here mentioned, the huge budgetary priority going to illegal immigrants is another cause of that. Secondly, education, which I'm a former high school teacher. I went to great public schools in this area, but I taught at a school in inner city LA, and we have a lot of schools in the state that are not giving kids the education that they need. And it's a lot of students in low income areas that are the ones that are really getting the short end of the stick. And then the third issue I'd say is public safety. Keeping our communities safe. We've had a lot of laws that have passed that have made our communities less safe, and as Supervisor Frost mentioned, have disrespected law enforcement. And so, I think that is an agenda that our caucus should stand up and have policies, reforms in favor of, and say this is what we are fighting for. Because your question is right on point. You don't know what we're fighting for, what our agenda has been, because there hasn't been one.
just as a question, I'm retired civil service in the military as well. I'm about ready to leave. I live in Cameron Park. My biggest problem is, as a vet, I feel like my vote's being stolen, you know? With all the DMV registration or DMV driver's license that they're giving to illegals, but yet they're taking away driver's license from American citizens that can't afford their child support. I have issues with that, you know? What are we going to do about it for the GOP? And voter harvesting. What about voter harvesting? You know?
Just hold it up closer to you.
Hello? Sorry. What about voter harvesting that's going on in the state? And what's the GOP going to do about that, you know?
Well, could you repeat the first question about the
DMV and all that?
Yeah.
Okay. They're giving driver's license to illegals, and I think that's where a lot of voter fraud's coming in. And with that, can you guys hear me?
Hold it close to your mouth, yeah.
Sorry, I can't hear very well. I just went through some cancer treatment too. So, what's going on with the voter harvesting that's going on in our state, and the illegals getting driver's licenses, but yet they're taking away driver's licenses from citizens in our state? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's...
I just feel like my vote as a veteran is being stolen, and I'm done with it, you know?
I think it compromises the voting process. I think we have proof that it does, and I believe there's some litigation over that going on right now. So I think the assemblyman might be able to speak to that, but I also want to let you know that there are policymakers at the legislature who are Democrats who have said to me personally, there's too many Democrats. And there are constituents of mine who are Democrats who have fought for democratic issues or social issues or whatever, you know, fought hard over time, and then now they're coming to my office and saying, this has gone too far, this isn't good, we've got to, I have an idea, and they want to start trying to balance it out. So even on that, you know, I think in it on any side, if you have two sides of an argument represented, you're going to come out with a better outcome because you get all those ideas out and you work it out for the better. But
out of curiosity, who has heard this term ballot harvesting before? Is this someone? Wow. Ballot harvesting. Yeah, so it's become sort of the focus of a lot of attention since the last elections. It actually stems from a law that passed in 2016. I wasn't in the legislature at the time, but I would have voted against it. I think we already play way too fast and loose when it comes to our elections. But what the ballot harvesting law did is, you know, previously you could give your ballot to, let's say, basically a family member, and they could go and turn it in for you. What the ballot harvesting law did is it said now not only can a family member do that, but anyone can take your ballot and turn it in for you. And so the consequence of this, which was entirely premeditated, is you had armies of operatives in the last elections that would show up at people's doorstep asking for their ballots. And some would argue that it had a significant effect on the outcome of some elections. So I would sure like to see that law repealed and then restore some integrity to our elections. Unfortunately, I don't think that there's much appetite in our legislature as it now is constituted to do that. You are seeing some litigation go on in the courts, and there was actually just a victory from a suit by Judicial Watch in LA County to clear up their voter rolls. So, you know, I think that just needs to be the two-pronged approach. I do think that, you know, at the end of the day, and it's not just the ballot harvesting law. I've seen a lot of laws passed that tinker with the way our elections are run. And I think it's really troubling. And I think that most folks, again, regardless of party, have a basic sense of fair play that they think ought to be respected when it comes to elections, when it comes to the way the government works. And so I think that, you know, that it's something that those who are aware of what's going on should raise public awareness about, because I think a lot of people wouldn't like it and would then contact their representative to get this thing repealed. Yeah, back there in the white shirt. Yep.
So what is very important about improving elections is really finding these ideas to just really make it that your vote for particular candidates can actually be much more improved. So one very well-founded idea would be to improve it to ranked choice voting, which basically would actually have it where your first place person that you want would get first place, second place. Let's just say out of let's just take, for example, the special election we have right now. There are about, if I'm not mistaken, 7 or 6 candidates that are there. So people can can vote first place Kevin Kiley, second place Brian Dale, third place Silky, and so after a accumulation of those votes, whoever gets 50% basically is, or at least in this type of current system, is basically the winner. They get 50 plus. If it just stay below that, it'll be the top 2 advances, and then the people after the first round, whoever doesn't get the most required votes, like they only get like 1% of the vote, those votes, whoever was the second place voter, like maybe Kevin Kiley or Silky, gets added to that token. So whoever gets 50%, and it keeps going until finally someone hits 50%. Would that be something that can be looked into to basically improve our elections?
Yeah, it's interesting. This is the idea of ranked choice or instant runoff voting. Funny story, when I was in college, they used this system for the student government elections. And so we had a debate of all the candidates for like the student body president. I was moderating the debate. I wasn't running. But you know, there are 6 candidates or something, so you'd rank them all 1 through 6. So I asked them all right, you know, I assume you're all going to vote for yourself first. Who are you going to vote for second? Led to some chaos as people had to endorse their opponents. But what we've seen happen, actually, is that in the real world, that in systems that have this, like in San Francisco, you actually see that sort of gamesmanship play out where you have people like endorse their opponents and form alliances. And so I'm not sure that all that is good or bad. I'm not familiar enough with the way the system works. I know San Francisco uses it now. And I want to say, is it Maine? Maybe has ranked choice voting. But I would draw some analogy to top 2, what the gentleman here mentioned before, where anytime you kind of change the way your elections are run, there are unintended consequences, and you open the door to gamesmanship. So what we've seen with the top 2 system is that, you know, since the top 2 vote getters, regardless of party advance, the number of candidates from each party that are in the race will actually have a significant effect on who ultimately ends up advancing. So you have candidates who might, you know, try to recruit people of the other party to get in the race in order to improve their odds. You've heard stories of this. Or you might have, if it's like 2 candidates of one party and let's say 8 candidates of the other, or actually to give you a real world example, this actually happened last year. You had 2 Republicans running, and I think it was other way around. 2 Democrats running and 6 Republicans in a district that had traditionally been Republican. The 2 Republicans Democrats split the vote right up the middle, and then the 6 Republicans sliced the vote really thin, so the 2 Democrats moved on, and we had your scenario where you had 2 Democrats on the ballot, even in a traditionally Republican district. So I haven't thought through how all of that would work in a ranked choice voting system, but I'd be a little cautious to endorse the idea without a better sense of how it's actually played out. Do you have some thoughts on that, sir?
Well, how about just simplifying it and they can have a voter ID? Yes.
Absolutely.
Why do we not have voter ID? I'm actually done.
I think you've answered your own question in a sense. I mean, we've had all these changes to the election laws, and they're all done for a reason. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, back there. Sorry. Yeah.
Vote. When I vote, I always present my driver's license. Always. And they say, we don't need it. And my response is, you should. If you can't, I notice the state seems to be pushing this mail-in ballot. There's all kinds of abuse for that. If you've got a handicap placard, fine, do a mail-in ballot. But if you don't have a placard, then go to the poll, vote, and present a photo ID. That'll clean a lot of it up.
Well, just to add one point to that, we have this pilot now that Sac County is part of. This is one of the 5 counties in the state that is 100% vote by mail now. But I heard stories of people who would go to hand in their ballot on election. They had to wait in line for several hours at Sac State and other places. So it's pretty ironic that we go to like 100% vote by mail. You have people standing in line for hours on election day. At least they got a free postage. That's true. You get free postage now. The lady back there in the black had a question.
Right here?
Or maybe it's blue.
Is it blue? Okay.
Black and blue. I'm just going to go back to the gentleman over there that said that we are the people, we are the ones that should be telling the legislature what to do. And so then you commented about the propositions and the fact that they are kind of twisted, the way they're written and everything. So then I say to you, as our representative, what I'd like to ask you to do is to educate us. Take the time to look at the propositions, put on your website what they really mean, what you feel we should vote, and then maybe years ago there was Eric Cantor in the federal government that in the Senate, I think it was, that had a you vote thing, and every time a bill came up, he would summarize it, and you could go in on the website and put, I'm for this or no, get rid of it, that type of thing. So if you could empower us to know what's going on, because everybody works, so you could summarize it, you could make it precise. Like you said, you went up to the legislature and you took some people with you to fight for something. Well, use us, get us behind you, and if you had on your website that, you had 500 people in Folsom that want this, it's going to have a lot more power, and it's going to make the other ones in the legislature have to start doing this also. And maybe we can get back to a representative government under those circumstances. So please do that.
Very well said. And this is short of what you're asking for, but I don't know if you're on my email list where we send out a little summary of what's going on every week. Supervisor Frost, I know, does a great job with that as well. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, we definitely need to find better ways to make government more accessible to the folks that we're supposed to be representing.
Let's get someone in the back over here.
Shelby Rue, Orangevale, thank you both for being here. One comment and then a question. The thing that brings a great amount of consternation is to call these illegal people something other than illegal. My question is, we recently sold our shop. It was a regionally very successful business because we couldn't, it was very frustrating, the empowerment that the employees had and the lack of power the employers had. Is there any, do you have any solutions or anything you see that will, again, empower the small businesses?
That's a great question, and California treats small businesses terribly. I mean, we have the worst business climate in the country. Routinely, that's, we're rated by various metrics as being the worst for business in the country as a result of the regulations, as a result of how easy it is to sue, and the way that we make our laws so friendly to plaintiffs' lawyers, and a whole lot of other things as well. And it's small businesses that pay the highest price, and it makes it really hard for small businesses to get by here. Any small business owners in the room? There you go. Big companies have a big compliance department. They can absorb the costs, but these regulations after regulation after regulation, makes it really tough for small businesses, which are really the backbone of our economy and at the heart of our civic life. We've got a wonderful business community here in Folsom. I will add that a recent decision by the California Supreme Court has led to chaos throughout this state when it comes to employers. It's called the Dynamex decision. Anyone familiar with this decision? So the word is still kind of getting out about this. I've actually hosted 2 events on the topic in the last few months along with the California Chamber of Commerce. Basically, this decision has abolished most forms of independent contracting in California, which is, what a lot of small businesses rely on. If you can't classify someone as an independent contractor, there are huge costs associated with that in terms of workers' comp, in terms of payroll taxes, in terms of potential liability. And especially in sort of the emergent gig economy, it's just the way a lot of businesses operate. And it's what workers prefer because it allows them the flexibility to work in a way that is well suited to their lifestyle. So, didn't matter. California Supreme Court came in and said, well, we don't care. We're abolishing what had been a test, a legal test that had developed over centuries through the common law that embodied a fairly intuitive notion that if you have a right to control someone's performance of their work, okay, you're an employer, but if they control the performance of their own work, then you're an independent contractor. Instead, the new test basically says that someone like the plumber who comes in, who's totally unrelated to whatever type of business you're doing, you can call them an independent contractor, but everyone else, if they play some role in what the purpose of your business is, they need to be considered an employer. So this has created chaos, I say, because no one's really sure what the new rules are, how it applies to them. It's created huge litigation traps, and for every industry that you can imagine. If you don't believe me, you can read the LA Times a couple weeks ago where Stormy Daniels had an op-ed against this decision. So I'm actually the co-author of a bill to reverse this California Supreme Court decision. We have the power as the legislature to do that. There's another bill that goes in the complete opposite direction and seeks to codify the decision, put it in a statute, make it sort of firmer in law. This is going to be one of the major battles at the Capitol this year. And to the point raised by back there about getting people involved, this is something that I've been encouraging the business community to do. Because this decision affects so many people in so many different ways that I think it actually is a major opportunity for coalition building to get more people involved, to bring the voice of small business more fully into the process, and to form a coalition that can not only reverse this terrible decision, but that can be used, who was the questioner again? There we go. That can be used to actually make our state more friendly towards small businesses. Yes, sir. Oh, did you already ask one?
Yeah,
Sorry,
well,
those who haven't.
I've been known to talk a little bit. But part of what I'm hearing is there's a lot of things folks want to hear and see done, but there's an obstacle in the way, and it's called the media. They don't put the word out and give truthful evaluations. They give their own opinion. And generally what you read in the newspaper and hear on television and radio are opinions of the individuals expressing them or writing them rather than a thorough reporting of what happened or what went on. Is there a way we can hit them with a club and bring them around?
Freedom of speech. Freedom of the press.
Let me just say, and I'll get to you back there in just a sec. I think you're correct that a lot of times what you see in the media does not accurately reflect the facts. I'll say a couple things to that. First, I do think that it's all the more reason why we need to adopt the suggestion of one of our previous questioners who said we need to make things more accessible to people ourselves and find new ways of reaching people. And I think that is, when you see folks who are successful in politics, they do find ways to actually build those bridges so you don't have to use the media as a conduit. But I will at the same time say that it's important to use the media where you can to help get your message out and to actually, use it to help you accomplish what you want to accomplish. So one example of this is we had this initiative pass in 2016 that created what we call the 72-hour rule. So as a little bit of context here, there's been a long-standing practice at the Capitol where if you, where basically you take a bill that's run through the whole gauntlet of the legislative process, you strip out its contents, put something totally different in, usually a deal worked out by special interests behind closed doors, and then you vote on it before anyone knows what's happened. It's called gut and amend. There are stories how at the very end of the year, at the end of session, the paper is still warm from the printer that the bill's printed on when they're voting on the thing. So voters said enough is enough. We want a rule that says you have to have a bill available for everyone to see for 3 days, 72 hours, before it can be passed. And that passed overwhelmingly. Voters put this into the state constitution. But the first time this was tested, the legislature just decided to ignore it and passed almost 100 bills that violated the 72-hour rule. It was just too much to ask. So I still made a big deal of it on the floor of the assembly, but they still did it anyway. But then we went to the media because it turned out a lot of newspapers had endorsed the initiative creating the 72-hour rule. And so we said to the news, look, you endorsed this thing and now they're ignoring it. And so like, well, I guess you're right. And so they all published editorials condemning what the assembly had done. And we held a press conference on it. I led a press conference on it. I introduced a resolution to make sure that we do comply. And I think the San Jose Mercury News had the best headline. It said, "What part of 72 hours doesn't the California Assembly understand?" And because we were able to use the media to do a little bit of shaming, you might say, something extraordinary happened. They brought all of the bills back and actually voted on them again, complying with 72 hours. The first time this has ever happened, where you have a bill that passes and then you come back and vote on it again without changing it at all, in the entire history of the California legislature. Well, eventually they did. And yes, back there.
Hi, I'm Terrence Kilpatrick. I'm from Sacramento. And I wanted to encourage everybody here. I know Sue Frost, and I know she comes out of the private sector, and her husband Jack Frost, and so I trust Sue. And Mr. Assemblyman, I've not met you, but because Sue trusts you, I'm willing to trust you.
You can trust him.
This follows what Madam Black and Blue said a moment ago. It's not so much me wanting to support something that you're doing, but rather the flip side, which is I've got really good ideas that I would be thrilled to see put into either the legislative process or the initiative process. I can actually write some of these things, but I don't have the kind of juice that it takes to make them hit the vote or the legislature. I would love to be able to communicate with you directly and say, here, what about this? What about this? How about this idea? How about that idea? And I'm willing to bet that many of the members of the audience would feel the same way. I don't know how to accomplish that. I follow Sue's blast emails that come out and occasionally respond to them, but I would love to hear how you would encourage citizen participation in attempts to influence the types of laws that you might pursue.
He's talking to you.
Sign him up.
Well, I mean, I'll say for myself, you know, I meet with anyone who wants to meet with me, and so if you have an idea, let me know, and we can talk about it. And if it's something that I think is good and is that we could work on and potentially get passed, you know, we'll introduce it. And a lot of my, you know, the good ideas I had weren't actually my ideas. They're ideas that folks in the community brought to me, and I can give you a few examples of that if you want. So. I think that I would caution, however, that, and this is kind of a theme that I talked about at the beginning, that, you know, I think that too many legislators view the sum and substance of their responsibilities as creating laws, whereas I think that's, you know, one component of the job, but there are other components such as the oversight role we discussed before and stopping bad laws. Because, or trying to find ways to make them less bad, because the legislative process can be, you know, kind of a gauntlet. And so that's one of the things I've tried to figure out is, all right, where are the major leverage points in the process where I can either stop something or at least negotiate it down to something that's going to be less harmful for the folks that I'm representing. But I 100% take your point. I think that a lot of people feel just kind of powerless as citizens in California today. And it's because of a lot of the structural factors that we talked about before. I think it's because of the imbalance we have in the legislature. I think it's because we have special interests that are way too much power at the Capitol. And if we are going to get this state back on the right track, we do need to find ways to better engage the public in the process.
Thank you, Terrence, for those kind words.
Thank you. By the way, I want to welcome you to Folsom. Thank you for coming out tonight. Really appreciate that. I had a quick question. I don't want to assume I know the answer before I ask, but in the last election, were you for or against the legislation of marijuana? I'm curious.
So you're talking about the initiative?
Yeah, before I ask my question, I just wanted to
Well, I'm going to reframe it a little because this is a state event, and so it's not really appropriate for me to be talking about positions on initiatives and elections. But I, as a general policy matter, have not favored legalization.
Okay. My question to that was, and I feel the same way, my question on that was, is that in 20 years ago, in 1998, all the states got together and decided to go against big tobacco. And they were actually able to pass rules that they cannot advertise on television, billboards, public transportation, different things. But I feel like every minute I'm driving on 50 or 80, I'm seeing billboards for marijuana, like on every other billboard on 50 and 80. And I'm kind of curious, like, how are they able to skate by this when it's against the law for cigarette companies to be able to do this? How is marijuana companies able to somehow skate through this? And I was wondering, is it something that needs to be handled legislatively? Because it just doesn't seem like something that should be able to happen. And I'm honestly, it's frustrating every time you drive down the 50 and 80 and see every billboard, a marijuana billboard now. Just curious.
It's a good question, and part of it is that this thing passed, and then the legislature, it's consumed a lot of the attention of the legislature the last couple of years. This is passed in 2016, and there's all these issues related to marijuana that now need to be worked out. Now there have been some laws that have passed that, in some sense limit access to minors, like no cannabis candies and things like no cartoon characters on the thing, that sort of thing. Yeah, exactly. As far as the billboards, I mean, it's a good point. I'd have to see how kind of the regulations around marijuana compare to around cigarettes. In some sense, you've had debates about whether it should be regulated more like marijuana or more like cigarettes or more like alcohol in different contexts. Also, our friends on the other side of the aisle, this is the one area where they want to cut taxes is when it comes to marijuana, but want to raise taxes on everything else. And then you have these issues related to driving under the influence. We saw an uptick in deaths in other states that legalized, and we still don't have any good science about how you measure impairment and that sort of thing as well. And there's a lot of issues related to banking, and so this thing passed, and it's sort of been a mess in a lot of ways. But I think at the end of the day, it's really important to maintain the ability for local communities to manage their own oversight of the issue so that we don't have this coming into communities that don't want it.
I can just add a little bit about cannabis. At the county level, the challenge that we're seeing in the county, we have kind of held the line because we wanted to kind of sit back and see how public safety and our DA and how, we wanted to watch other communities that legalized it and see how that went. The challenge one of the challenges that we're having is that since it was legalized, illegal activity has increased considerably. And so we have a big problem now and that's why they want to lower the tax, I'm sure, because people who have to pay so much more to buy it legally, and they've been buying it illegally probably for years and for way less. And so it's a real problem that has emerged, and that's only one of them. So there is still a push to legalize the growth and distribution and all of it in the county. We've kind of come consistent with what the state requires, a little bit more than the state requires. We allow up to 9 plants, recreational or medical, if you keep it in your house and you're permitted and all that, but we don't allow the businesses to come into the county. But we're still paying for the results of it. And the big concern in my mind around it is that public health and public safety, those two things.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, sir. I'm going to keep you running tonight.
Actually, I think it's, I'd like to segue to cannabis because that was one of my questions. I had sent you an email, and it's kind of my curiosity on a couple fronts on cannabis revenues. Are the funds earmarked? Are they going to the general fund? And then the question I have for you is I'd like to see something like the master settlement agreement we have with tobacco to start funding the potential and to research and understand the potential for the, in the use of marijuana. You're going to have schizophrenia and other psychoses that could be developed and are being developed. The American Lung Society, is looking at the potential for greater increased cost of healthcare related to lung cancer. But the real issue is, as a long-term heavy users do face increased psychological psychoses, schizophrenia risk. The question is, and my desire would like to see funds earmarked within the cannabis revenues, the taxes, for potential long-term healthcare issues that will surface over time. And then secondarily, I'd like to see us look at the idea of collecting those metrics on crime use, healthcare, other things related to cannabis use, and so that we can make intelligent and informed decisions about where that money needs to be captured and spent eventually, beyond just more revenue going into the general fund for who knows what. Do you have any thoughts, or is there a vision in your mind of how we might be able to create a master settlement like the tobacco companies had to do, but force it more from revenue in the state level?
The second thing you mentioned is a really good idea. I think that, we should start focusing on data collection related to secondary and primary consequences of legalization. I think that's a great idea. And, I think that it's something that, one of our agencies could do, or maybe we need legislation to direct them, and there'd be some debate, I'm sure, over how you exactly define these consequences. But to my knowledge, it's not something that's being done now. To your first point, there is some earmarking there related to public health. I'm not sure exactly in the way you're describing. Of course, as with our discussion of the transportation funding earlier, often it's just a shell game. Something gets earmarked for one thing and then funds are moved around, and it doesn't actually end up going there. It was the same thing, by the way, with this cigarette tax that passed a few years ago. Those funds were supposed to be 100% earmarked for increasing Medi-Cal reimbursement rates for physicians, and they tried to basically put none of it there, eventually agreed to put half of it there, but it still should have been 100%. So same issue here, but I think that your point is spot on, that to the extent that this generates revenue, we should collect the data and see what the negative externalities are and use that to mitigate those impacts. It's a really smart point.
I just wanted to ask, why is it taking so long to fix the bike trail over between Hazel and Lake Natoma and Negro Bar? There's that big landslide, and it's still blocked.
Oh,
I know that the
are you the lady? Are you the one that emailed me about that? Possibly. Oh, you were. Okay. Is that the landslide that came down? It's been there for quite a while.
It's blocking the bike trail. I think it's been blocking it for a couple of years now.
Yeah, it's part of the state parks, and apparently my office looked into that, and it's a very expensive endeavor to fix that, and I guess that's why it has not yet been fixed, but it's not something that the city controls, because it's not really a city issue, it's a state parks issue. So that would be something to take up with state parks, and I was hoping my office connected you with them, the right person at state parks. Did they? I think basically it's one of those things where they don't have money to clear that, and the question was, why can't we just clear it? And I haven't seen it, but apparently that's what I mean. Oh.
It's a combination of the fact that it's difficult to do the clearing,
okay,
it's expensive to do the clearing, and they can't guarantee that they can stabilize the hill afterwards and it won't slump again back onto the trail.
Oh, thank you, Mike.
Series of complications that are keeping them from doing anything at all.
Public safety. So what, did everyone hear that? It's a combination of difficulty in clearing it, the safety of making it happen, and then making sure that it's situated and stable afterwards. So before they do anything, they want to make sure they can fix it right, and I guess are they working on it, or? Persist as is for a good long time. I'd find another path.
We've been checking in with them every week about this, so I don't know what the latest is, but you get in touch with me or my office afterwards, and we'll let you know what the latest from state parks is, but it's been incredibly frustrating.
Yeah. Yes. You. Yes, you.
What is Sacramento County's plan on fixing the roads? I know you're saying there's not enough money to actually fix our roads, but just putting Band-Aids over potholes is not going to fix the long-term effect on our roads. And going to work on Madison Avenue with 50 different potholes isn't really helping my car.
Yeah, I have to tell you that last year the county had 50,000 potholes and 13,000 311 calls. And so we are at that point where we're losing, the roads are declining and we don't have enough money to even maintain where we're at. And so what the county is looking at right now, we have about $30 million a year, and we expect there's going to be more SB1 money coming in, believe it or not. The SB1 hasn't totally kicked in. There's more excise taxes that are going to go up this July. And for those of you that have electric cars, I think in 2020, that's when that $100 registration fee begins to be charged to you. So what we're hoping over the next few years, that SB1 will ramp up to about $25 million a year. That doesn't even begin to manage the problem. So what the county is planning to do is, rather than fix all the worst roads, which are exponentially more expensive, we're going to look at we've done a study of our entire road system, and we're going to try and focus a portion of the money on roads that are not so bad and save the roads before they decline, because once they decline to a certain pavement condition below 50, once they get a certain level down, it costs exponentially more. And so what we're calculating is that by 2038, if we do this, we can save the taxpayers $289 million. She's talking about Madison Avenue and how it's really hard. Yeah, Madison Avenue, believe it or not, is on the list, is on our CIP list. That's one of the roads that's at the top of the list we're gonna be working on Madison Avenue soon. In the next year, I think we've got road work between, I don't know if it's between Kenneth and Hazel, but we have some work going on Madison. But I drive on Madison every day, and it's like a war zone. It's like I'm trying to miss the potholes because I've had to buy the extra tires, so I hear what you're saying. And the real frustration around all this, I think the voters back in 2014 or something like that, they voted for a bond for road money, but the money never got to the roads. And then they have vehicle weight taxes that are supposed to go to fix roads, but that money is going to transportation, but that money is going to pay bonds because it's going to pay debt. And then in 2010, the gas tax that we paid was changed a little bit so that half of what we paid in the gas tax was transferred over to excise tax. And excise tax is different. It can go to the general fund, and it can then be redirected to anything. And so when they did that just gave them more, at the state level, more freedom on where they could divert that money to. And while the state has had, I think in the last 7 years, their income's gone up by $40 billion or something like that, I don't know. And they have, I thought it was $15 billion in reserves. He said 21 now. So they've got reserves and they've got money. The voters voted for $33 or $4 billion for the high-speed rail project, which is a huge debacle. And I don't. If you look at the graphs, and I'm trying to wrap my head around this whole road system in California thing. It's like the state and federal government just decided they were going to not do roads anymore, and their big priority is public transportation and getting us between the big cities. I don't know. I don't know.
Like it was in the military, it's fenced. If we pay those taxes, that's what it should be used for. Not them to sit there and say, well, we're going to do this because of some special interest. We're driving on these roads. I go to school every day. I sit there dodging potholes on Oak Avenue.
He's complaining about the roads and dodging potholes. And one of the things I said, I serve on a couple of boards, but the STA board, the Sacramento Transportation Authority, is the local Measure A. And that money goes to roads and regional transit and capital improvement, and all that is good. And they don't have enough money, so there is going to be a conversation around what will the taxpayers be willing to pay more taxes for roads. I'm kind of getting so. If you feel that way, the question I have is, why am I the only one downtown that feels that way? I mean, there's very few of us that feel strongly, but I do. Let me ask you, I mean, well, maybe I shouldn't ask this, but, you know, you might just tackle me, but the comment that I did say at one point was, I think if the taxpayers, if you had a measure that was going to be dedicated to fixing roads and it could not be reallocated to anything else, and it didn't go to the state, and it just was a local tax measure, they might do that. But I don't even know if the taxpayers will do that, because I think the taxpayers are tired of being told it's going to fix the roads and it never gets to the roads. So the gentleman in the red shirt back here, I think we opened a can of worms on this one.
That's right. So what keeps coming up over and over again is all of our tax money is being diverted and siphoned off, and we're screwed. So how do we get control of our money? Why do we send them our property taxes? Why do we keep sending them the gas tax? Why don't we just stop sending them?
I think as a people, you know, if you got organized and you started writing letters, hundreds of letters, and you got everyone you know to keep writing letters and going down to the Capitol and being in your legislators' face and tell them what's important, that maybe they would begin to understand that roads are important. You know, maybe that would help us. You know, when I was in the mortgage business, I would hire people, and if they weren't doing well on the job, I didn't just fire them. I tried to help them. I tried to work with them and teach them, send them to classes, and have someone mentor them. But when you vote us into office and we go up on the Hill, you know, we're up against, we're the minority, you know, on a lot of these issues. And so you getting behind us and helping us would go a long way to making, you know, to building our case, helping us build a bigger case back at the state and at the county. There was a woman in the middle, and then this woman in the front.
I can't tell you how many letters I've written to Ami Berra, Dianne Feinstein, and all of our politicians complaining about all this stuff. And I get back a form letter that says, this is what their position is, I'm sorry. There's nothing. No, it doesn't matter what I say.
Well, you have to elect representatives that haven't forgotten that know who they work for, and that are in touch with their
and it goes
communities.
back to what he said, we're buried. It's too late. It's like done.
It's not, I don't think it's too late, because guess what? I want to tell you a story. I've been on the board, I've been in boards where, you know, there was just barely a quorum there that time. And there's 9 people, and out of 9 people, I'm the only one who voted no on something. And it didn't pass. It didn't pass because they didn't have enough of a quorum. They didn't have enough people there. So one person opening their mouth and having conversations with other people can make a difference. There are a few of us, Mike Kozlowski is one of them, who is I don't know, we're aligned in the way we think. You know, I mean, he's a good leader, and we work together to try to influence others and to help, you know, push things that are good that we know our constituents are going to want. So I think we can make a difference. It's just we have to work harder right now, and we can't give up. because it's worth fighting for.
We're just about out of time here, but you've been waiting very patiently. Do you have?
And I promised this woman here.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't want to break my promise.
So I hear you guys say how difficult it is to get things fixed. We have so many issues. I understand how difficult it is to turn things around. My question is, well, I've got lots of questions, but my real question is, how do we set ourselves up for success? I see that there's 4 Republicans on the ballot and 2 Democrats. In my humble opinion, we've already lost. Those votes will be separated, and I feel like we do this time and time again. When do we start playing together, even on the same team, so that we have a chance to set up for success? Because once you get in there, you know, I hear you both say how difficult things are, and it's your hands are tied and things can't change and all of that. Well, we don't even get a chance to get in there, and I'm not the only one who feels that we are going down a slippery slope and we need to change things, and we need to have our ballots set up for success. We need to get on each other's same page so that we've got a chance to get in there to begin with.
That's hard.
Thank you very much. I can't really address the question about elections and that sort of thing in this forum, but I will say in response to kind of the sentiment, and then I know we have, how about 2 more questions after that, because I know a couple people have had their hands up for a long time, you know, in response to kind of the question we had before, why we keep sending more and more of our money and this sort of thing, and why does this keep happening? And the answer is that special interests just have so much power in Sacramento, and generally what unites their interests are just more revenue. And that's been the general direction of the state for a long time. I have very rarely seen examples of where citizens kind of coming together in mass have been able to have make a difference. One example I'll give you is we had a bill related to homeschools that was introduced last year. I don't know if anyone followed this legislation, but it wanted to regulate and really just go after homeschools in a way that was terrible. And you had a lot of folks from homeschool families who are not happy about this. The whole reason that they want to homeschool their kids is to avoid this sort of interfacing with the government. And so you had folks organize and go to the Capitol when this bill was heard. I'm in the Education Committee. I was actually running the hearing most of the time because I'm the vice chair, and the chair stepped out. And you had thousands of people who showed up. And they were sitting in the Capitol all day waiting for this hearing. I heard from some of the sergeants who have been there for years, they'd never seen so many people come. And has anyone been to a hearing at the Capitol before? Oh wow. If you're a member of the public, you can go to the microphone and you can just say for like 5 seconds, I'm so-and-so and I support or I oppose this bill. That lasted for over 3 hours with people who had come to the Capitol from all over the state to speak out against this terrible bill. And guess what? When the 3 hours were up, the bill didn't even get a motion. And I can tell you for sure that if that had not happened, the bill would have sailed through. So look, you probably can't do that on every bill. But it does give you a little bit of hope that even in a system where our legislature is so insular, and folks rightfully feel so disconnected from our government, that there are opportunities to engage as citizens to make a difference in the process. But I understand the frustration. Okay, we'll go here and then there and call it a night. Fair enough?
Yes. Well, that was going to be my question. As a seasoned woman, you notice I didn't say old. But as a seasoned woman, I was going to ask you, hold the microphone to my mouth. I can do this. I was going to ask you what I could actually do. And I'm wondering if there's some of us who are retired, who have some time, who should toddle around the Capitol just making ourselves a nuisance. A positive nuisance with possibilities. The seasoned people.
A positive nuisance with possibilities. That's a great slogan. And yes, please, and get others involved and spread the word, because the bigger your army grows, there you go. I think you might have a future in politics.
I don't want to be a politician.
I would recommend,
Gotcha.
I would get organized behind an issue and understand all sides of it so that you put together the right strategy. Strategy is important, I think. And I think that's really great.
The gentleman back here, yes.
So my question is, what is the status, what conversations have you had with our federal officials about federal transportation infrastructure money coming back to the state? We, as you know, we're a donor state. For every dollar we send to the feds, we only get 70 cents back in benefits. So we've got a huge opportunity with the money that we send to the federal government to get some of that money back into California. And I don't know if you've had, Kevin, any conversations with our federal representatives, whether, you know, Mr. Barra or whoever, about getting the infrastructure dollars back into California, because it's obviously a frustration here, and we're tired of the taxes. We're paying sufficient of taxes at the federal level that we should be getting some of that money back. So, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great point. You know, where I can try to help with grants and that sort of thing to bring more funds here, and I know that we have members of Congress who are working hard to do that. You know, it's the transportation needs are so vast, and the situation is so dire, and the state has failed for so long in this area that I think you're absolutely right. We need to do everything we can to get more help from the federal level. What do you think, Sue? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've gone to Washington, D.C., and I have sat down with representatives, and we've, you know, the federal government does give money. They don't give as much as they used to give. Traditionally, they used to give something like 10 or 12%, and they don't. It stopped. It was around 2012 or 13 that it just started to dramatically shrink on the federal and the state level. So I don't know if there's something I don't know, that they changed the plan and didn't tell the rest of us or what, but the money stopped. We've tried, you know, a lot of people have tried. We've been advocating, the chambers have advocated, politicians have advocated, we've met with our congressmen.
That's right. Yeah, it's not just us. I mean, you have the, what do they call it, cap to cap that happens every year, where you have business leaders and political leaders from the region that go and meet with our representatives in Congress. So there are active efforts in this regard for sure. Well, with that, I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I've had the chance to do a number of these forums since I've been in office, and I think it is genuinely the most important part of my job. Because I can't represent you at the Capitol if I don't hear from you. And tonight was just a great example of why this is so important, because I think we heard a lot of great ideas that I can now take back and have a better sense of how folks are feeling and what our priorities ought to be. So I just want to thank everyone who took the time on this, is it March now? March 1st? February 28th night to participate in democracy. Thanks very much.
And I just want to say thank you, everyone. And also, I have a newsletter that I send out once a month. If you're not receiving my newsletter, it's short and sweet and to the point, and I try to be informational. So if you are interested, you can go to saccounty.net and sign up. And also, thank you so much for allowing us to be here tonight.